Disruption, we've been talking about how we're actually designed to be disruptors. It's innate in our DNA. When you say yes to Jesus, there's something that happened in us where we actually have a mandate, a responsibility to disrupt. Now, in picking that word disruption, I was slightly nervous to use that word, primarily because it can almost incite or imply an angst, anger, or just this malice or revenge or vengeance. And that's not my intent with that word. I was going back and forth, like it's almost like it incites that. And so I've been very clear throughout this series, throughout each message, to make it very clear. That is not how we disrupt things. We disrupt things very differently. And so we've been studying the life of Jesus and looking at the very unique situations he was put in. And the more and more that we study and look at the life of Jesus, I think it's becoming even more clear than it ever has before that Jesus was incredibly strategic, incredibly methodical in his approach to humanity. There's only one time that he sort of lost it, and I don't even think that's even does justice, but he got upset and he overturned tables at the temple. Why? Because they turned it into a place that wasn't a house of prayer. So we know there's a moment where Jesus, his actions as disruption, literally took a table and flipped them upside down. Now, some of us use that one example and say it's okay for us to be angry about everything in life. That's not the application of that passage. That is actually, if you look at the scope of Jesus' ministry, that is one rare occasion of where he literally turned tables. But if you look at all the other instances, you'll notice that Jesus didn't do disruption through anger, vengeance, revenge, malice. He didn't do it with any of that motivation. He did it through a totally different spirit, one that's full of peace, extremely thoughtful. I'm so fascinated by Jesus' thoughtfulness when he interacted with someone. Incredibly thoughtful. He was so in the moment with this individual. Here's a guy that has multitude. He had no private life at all. He had multitudes are thronging around him. And in moments, he would focus on one person, and that was all they were there for. Zacchaeus is one of those people so thoughtful towards Zacchaeus that in the midst of a crowd wanting Jesus' attention, Jesus picked this small man sitting in a tree and said, I'm going to your house today for lunch. When Jesus invites you to your house, you always say yes. And so Jesus was very thoughtful. One time he's going through a crowd and he feels power leave his body. And he stops and he's been being touched by people from every direction. And he says, who just touched me? And I love the story. The disciples are like, Jesus, I've all been touching you. And Siri is now talking to me.
Okay.
I don't know what I said. It sounded like Siri. And Jesus said, power, who touched me? And then finally this woman says, it was me. And in that moment, he turned to this woman and he's incredibly thoughtful. So he's with peace, his incredible thoughtfulness, his poise. He has such composure. I mean, here's a man that was thrusted into a time in human history that was restless, a religious system that had lost its point. It had lost empathy. It had lost compassion. It had lost mercy. It had lost it all. And Jesus stepped into that moment in human history, and he has such composure. I mean, to literally sleep through a storm that is threatening the life of his disciples is called incredible composure. And to stand in the face of a religious system that is itching to kill him, he stood with poise. He did it with such composure. And I think that's important for us. We sometimes get frazzled by the opposition and the onset. We just kind of throw these fits. And Jesus seemed to demonstrate such composure. And I believe we are to do the same. And the other thing that Jesus was phenomenal at is he was very precise and on the money. He didn't spend a lot of time trying to convince people. How do you take centuries of tradition and momentum of judgment, no compassion and no empathy, and turn that entire system upside down with one statement? How in the world do you do that? Or one simple act. And we've talked about several of them over the last few weeks. One of them that I think is the most comical one, or at least up on the list of comical, and that is making mud. I think Jesus, before he came to earth, he was like, you know what I'm going to do, guys? When I get down there, I'm going to do something kind of unorthodox and unconventional. I'm going to spit on the ground, make some mud, and wipe it on a blind guy's eyes. And Michael and Gabriel like, A little strange, but I'm looking forward to watching it. Then the day came, and Jesus, sure enough, pulled out this random, simple act that is so unconventional, and it works. It actually worked. And so we can study the life of Jesus, and we can see this man that disrupted culture, disrupted religious system, and disrupted world systems.